Came here.
Good, clean joke, right? Nothing nasty. It's just gender appropriate. So a duck goes into a convenience store. Says, "You got any grapes?" And the clerk says, "No, we don't have any grapes." Duck says, "Okay, and you leave." Comes back the next day. Says, "You got any grapes?" He said, "No, I told you yesterday, we don't have any grapes." Duck says, "Okay, and you leave." Third day he comes in. Says, "You got any grapes?" And the clerk says, "Look, I've told you twice before, we don't have any grapes. If you come in here one more time and ask for grapes, I'm going to nail your bill to the floor." Duck leaves. Comes back the next day and says, "You got any nails?" And the guy says, "No." He says, "Okay, you got any grapes?"
And it's not over yet. Good morning. So we talked about Docent Sale and Volunteer Recognition Night. Again, April 24th. If you didn't get the email, you probably unsubscribed like Doug. But if you did, I'll send you the link so you can RS. Okay? So if you didn't get it, send me a direct email. Some of you folks have actually in your applications through logistics marked that you don't want emails, so I legally can't send it to you. So if you want that changed, you have to do that part. The others, I think I can get you signed back into membership and crew, and hopefully me. So that will be it's the programs when we use an email program instead of a direct email. It's a MailChimp that you've seen. If you unsubscribe, it is illegal for us to resubscribe you. So I'll do it anyways, but you know, it's just
I didn't hear that.
being clear. Being clear. So we're all good. April 24th, it's a really, taco bar sounds kind of low, but our taco bar is amazing. So it's really good food. It is the only full meal presented to any members of this museum. You know, when you come to members night, you get cookies and drinks. You get a full, wonderful meal here and some good recognition. So be sure to be there. And then I had questions about Western Flyer. You must be a graduated docent to represent as a docent at this museum and all museums. So they're coming in, they're going to train docents next week? Yeah, the 24th. After our docent meeting, and then we'll give tours the next day to the general public, and then the evening to the memberships. Mr. Square?
Yeah, in those docent materials, and if you go to their website, you'll learn about this too. They are continuing Western Flyer all the way down Baja, up to Cia Cortez, and you have the opportunity to take that trip. Yeah, they've got the spots available, and it's like, if you want a very unusual vacation, check it out. Check it out.
Alex, I heard the word vacation.
I don't think it's the combo.
I don't think we know what that means.
So does anyone have any questions for me today? Does anyone else need parking passes?
I got a question.
Yeah.
What's the status on the San Salvador?
She's fine.
Huh? She's broken. When are they gonna fix it?
They've been working on her. We could sail her right now. She just does need that work done. I believe we have the wood coming in, Alex?
Yes, yes.
In case you don't know,
And
Alex
it's
is
going-
also
it's
the
going-
boat mom and senior first mate of San Salvador. So.
It is going in dry dock.
And she will be leaving for her regular dry dock May 5th. So we were hoping to put that repair off until dry dock, but it didn't want to stay off. So
Yeah, we set the sail and
Yeah.
doused it and it worked fine.
yeah, we're just not going to take her out this month. So
Super glue?
Duct tape.
June 13th for the docent graduation sale. That is graduates, mentors, docent board. So, and you can bring a guest.
If I'm on crew and on docent, do I get 2 lunches?
No.
Only if you bring Janet.
And remember, be sure you let me know if you have any dietary needs restrictions so that we make sure we have for everybody so that everybody can enjoy their box lunches. It's a lot of fun. We might even be able to rope Ray Ashley in as captain, so we'll see.
Thank you.
It's History Magazine, which is the magazine of the National Historical Maritime Society, had a really good article about Ray Astley's retirement. And I made copies. If you want a copy, see me. And it talks about all the things he did in 30 years, the boats he brought in, and all the things he did to make this a great museum. It's a really good article. So if you want a copy, see me.
We don't have anybody signed up to give shadow tours this weekend. Does anyone want to volunteer to give a shadow tour on Saturday or Sunday?
I'll be here Saturday.
Okay, you want to do the shadow tour? What time?
I'm here at 8 o'clock in the morning.
What time do you want them to be here? 10 o'clock?
10 o'clock.
Okay,
Get her done.
so be here at 9:45 on, right here?
It's ticket booths.
Well, we interfere with the ticket booth if we do. You want to do the ticket booth? Okay, 9:45 at the ticket booth, Saturday, if you still need to do shadow tours. Okay? Anybody for Sunday? Okay. I think, you have something? Running out of time.
Well, two things actually. First off, apologize for the real quick change. I actually forgot some of my computer at home and had to run back and go get it. So, but I knew that there was going to be lots of these announcements. I had plenty of time to make it up. Second thing is related to Deck Watch. I and Janice and I are going to be doing Deck Watch Saturday from probably about 10:30 till about 12:30 or so. This is not a shadow tour. This is just if you want to come by and hang out with us and see how we do Deck Watch, you're more than welcome to do that. That's mostly for the trainees. Okay.
What time?
10:30.
10:30?
Okay, Kevin, I saw you here. There you are. Dr. Sheehan is, of course, we've introduced before, is our curator for the museum. And he's going to be talking about our newest acquisition, the Scrimshaw Schooner. It actually will go into use next couple weeks, I think. It's a very timely to get that information.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How are we doing? All right? Good. Okay, so I'm here to talk about Scrimshaw. And as I do that, I have to make a couple of admissions. But first up, I want to just ask anyone here, hands up those, or if you want to volunteer some information, how many of you actually have sailed on Scrimshaw? Okay, so that's about 15 people more than I have done. I've never actually sailed on her. That's the first admission I have to make. Secondly, how many of you have ever been to Block Island? 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. Again, my admission would be I've never actually been to Block Island, or even, to be honest, that part of the United States. So, as you know, some of you know, I teach history at San Diego State, in part-time there. Just because I teach history doesn't mean I have to be to the places that I talk about, be it ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, or whatever. Similar to this talk, I'm going to give you my insights gathered from what I've read and the people I've talked to over the last few weeks. But there will be the definitive insights of those who maybe have been able to sail on board, or race against Scrimshaw, or race with her, or have been to Block Island. So my apologies if some of the information is, we'll say, second-hand, but nevertheless, I think it's still going to be valid and something we can use to learn from. So first up, I just wanted to acknowledge maybe some of the contributors who helped me to produce this presentation. First up, Dr. Christina Canet-Brophy, who is our new director here. She was able to link me up to some of her contacts on the East Coast. She comes from around, or she has been working in that area, not too far from where Block Island is located. And so she was able to connect me to, for example, Evelyn Ansell, who is the curator of small boats at the Herreshoff Museum, who provided me with some great information. And also, I'd already had contact with Paul Johnson at the Smithsonian and asked him for information as well. Sadly, the Smithsonian, like many other federal institutions or federally funded institutions, is undergoing a major crisis in the current political makeup of this country. So Paul wasn't able to immediately respond to my request for help, but has promised to do so in the future. We've also received information and assistance from Janet Dionis of the Block Island Historical Society. So some of the images I've been able to share with you today actually come from their archives and from an online resource that they have. And so if you're interested, you can shoot me an email. I'll send you the link to their website, and in particular to the YouTube video that they have playing there that gives you a nice overview of the history of Block Island. Curators at MIT and Mystic Seaport have also been approached and are offering us information as well about the Block Island boats. And on a local level, because this is not just an East Coast boat, this also has some strong connections to the West Coast as well. For example, Jerry Newton of the Ancient Mariners Sailing Society gave me some really great insights because he sailed against Scrimshaw here on the bay. And also Mark Albertazzi as well, photographer and sailor, avid sailor, and a great photographer. We've used his images here a number of times, and you'll see some of them here. And finally, a few images from Cynthia Sinclair as well. And the last owner, or the last private owner, we'll say, of Scrimshaw, Dennis Dowse, is still alive, and he has promised, or will promise, I'm sure in the future, to provide us with some vivid accounts of his relationship with the boat. So those are my acknowledgements. I kind of do them just to make sure that everyone is covered. And in this talk, what am I doing here? What's the purpose of our talk today? First up, to really answer some essential questions about Scrimshaw. First up, our motives for acquiring her. Why did the museum want a boat like this? What purpose might it fill in the museum's overall mission? And it does have a specific goal and purpose in mind. She's part of what I call our active fleet, among those vessels like Californian, Pilot, and Swiftboat, San Salvador, that actively sail and engage with the elements rather than the static displays that we have. So Scrimshaw will fit into that as well. She'll be part of that active fleet on a new level. Also want to provide something of an historical overview of the origins of Block Island cowhorns, their design, how they came to be conceptualized, their working lives. So while they are, for example, a quintessential, we'll say, East Coast design, they are also, interestingly, a product of a kind of a renaissance or a rebirth in West Coast boat building, just to the north of us up there in the greater Los Angeles area, or the San Pedro Basin. And finally, thanks to the insights of some of our staff here, in particular, I'll be able to kind of chronicle a little bit of the restoration process. So I'm paying tribute also to the staff and volunteers who have restored her from the condition in which we received her. And feel free to interject and say, hey, I've got an insight, I'd like to share this, or whatever. I'm more than happy to make this a very interactive kind of presentation as well. So there we are, Block Island. A few of you, okay, you've been there. This is a south to north view. It's fairly diminutive, not a big place at all. And there are a number of important geographic features. I might as well point these out at the beginning. Again, as you're looking from south to north, the west is on your left-hand side, east on the right. There's a large bight, right, a large sort of sandy bight there on the northeastern corner. That's going to be really important for the boats that we're talking about today, because that was, up until the late 19th century, one of the few places you could actually pull a boat up onto the shore and have it secured, or relatively secured, There's a large inland area or body of water called the Great Salt Pond. Up until, again, the late 19th century, that was closed off. That had no entrance to open water to Block Island Sound, for example. Eventually, the local inhabitants got the funding to open that up, and then it became a natural harbour and a very, very sheltered region for tying up, and eventually became part of the, we'll say, the nautical infrastructure of the island. But that's only a relatively late development in the story of Block Island boats. Kind of comes about almost towards the end of their working lives. On top of that, if you were to zoom in, you'd see that today Block Island is kind of exclusive real estate. Sport fishing, certainly recreational boating activities, big part of the, we'll say, the economic life of the island. It's about 9 miles south of the mainland of Rhode Island, in particular, but it's not really a commercial fishing port anymore. Those days are long gone. So now it's taken up with holiday crowds, spring breakers, I'm told, at certain times of the year. But at the times of the year, it has more of a sleepy, we'll say, feel to it. And because it is somewhat off the coast, and because it's sort of outside of the, we'll say, the main tourist areas, perhaps, of that part of the United States, it has preserved to a certain extent something of its early character. So, first up, why a classic East Coast design in a museum that focuses on the Pacific, right? Why did we choose this particular boat? Because it fitted a niche. And we're very good at training crew on how to sail tall ships. But as Dr. Ashley has said many times, and he's probably mentioned this to some of you guys too, there's always been a bit of a gap in the instruction in some of the basic seamanship that you need to in order to securely sail a small boat. And so that was his inspiration really in acquiring this vessel, was that those who have never had a chance to sail a small boat would in fact have that opportunity here at the Maritime Museum. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It does fill a niche. Secondly, economically, or in terms of, say, for example, the museum's mission, one of the things we do is we get our boats to actually pay their way as much as they can, right? We engage the public, we take them out on the harbour, we show them the essentials of what it was like to sail a tall ship, for example, back in the 19th century, 18th century, or whatever, or earlier. But this one is really for small, we'll say, cruises on the bay, select groups. So the plan is to have a captain or a skipper rather, and one line handler, maybe two. We're not quite sure yet. There's the debate going on about just how many people might be needed to safely handle this particular vessel. And then a group of about 6 or so guests, paying guests, who will come out and go on a cruise on the bay. And this is a model that's been tested by a few other private individuals and proven to be quite profitable. And we think we can do that here. So it will fill a niche. It will be sort of part of the recreational and educational activities that we provide. And also, I think, obviously offer a new opportunity to our volunteers and our staff as well. So that's why. Secondly, it's not just an East Coast design. Yeah, certainly its name is associated with this island, with Block Island, but it had a rebirth mid-20th century, mid to early 20th century, up in the San Pedro area, where a number of these boats were actually reconstructed. So ironically, or rather in the wake of their demise, almost their extinction, if you will, as commercial fishing vessels, they became part of the we'll say, recreational fleet on the west coast with that rebirth. So while they're not strictly speaking, West Coast designs. They are nevertheless part of the 20th century West Coast boat building tradition. And I'll tell you a few more details about that story as we get along. So the historical Block Island cowboys, they were designed to be sailed by a minimal crew and relatively easy to handle. And that also is why we acquired this particular vessel. We were actually offered another one prior to the acquisition of Scrimshaw, and Ray and I discussed this a little bit, but he felt after a while that the Scrimshaw was a better fit for this museum. There are actually two other Block Island cow horns on the bay here currently. One is a 40-footer and the other a bit smaller than that, I think about 22 feet or thereabouts. So in a sense, the spread between these three boats really reflects, historically speaking, the construction of these vessels too on and around Block Island, because there was actually no, we'll say, defined size for these. It was basically what a family could come up with. They were usually produced by a father and son, a fishing family, not designed according to plans, but rather rule of thumb and eyeballing what was the best design or the closest design to the, we'll say, the Block Island template. And then size would depend on the resources you have, the money you had, and the purpose as well. So just because they're of different dimensions doesn't mean that they're not genuine Block Island boats. And as they've evolved over time too, they've developed slightly different rigs, as you'll see when you look at some of the pictures of the newer versions that I'll show you. But first up, well, I've been talking for a while, haven't I? But let's talk about Block Island itself, its history, the context out of which it comes, this particular vessel. Because for me, any sailing vessel, any vessel, is part of, we'll say, the product of the material culture of a region. And this is no exception. Block Island cow horns are produced out of the historical context, out of the people from which they came. And we have here quite an interesting story of interaction, communication, cultural influences from different maritime traditions and that sort of thing, as well as perhaps a little bit of controversy about exactly who thought of this design first up. Let's go into that for a bit, shall we? There we are, just in case you're wondering exactly where Block Island is. It's, as I was saying, about 9 or 10 miles south of Rhode Island. The Block Island Sound is sort of to the left. And other famous important ports and ports of call on the East Coast, Newport, for example, Providence and so on, and New York down to beyond the left of our map here. A little bit further out, again, you see it in relationship to Long Island Sound and so on. And again, in admitting the truth, I have not been to this region, so what I've learned about it is come from conversations and also just what I've been able to dig up myself in terms of my research on this particular boat and its geographic, hydrographic context. That's a mid, I think it was 1831, map of Block Island itself. You see, for a while there, it acquired another name. It's called New Shoreham. Then it transitioned back to Block Island eventually. But as I was saying to you earlier, a couple of really important geographic features. The Great Salt Pond, which is in this map not joined to an open sea, and then secondly the large sandy bight on the right there. And all around it you'll find either promontories, not so much rocky, but rather more like Point Loma, if you were to look close, with a sort of a sandy colour of cliffs and drop-offs leading down to the water's edge. This guy here, he's largely responsible for the name that Block Island has today, and also the name of the boat we are talking about, the Block Island cow horn. Adrian Block was a Dutch navigator and explorer he arrived in the region in 1614. He wasn't the first European to get there, nor the first human, in fact. The Native Americans had been resident on the island for time immemorial, and they called it Manassas, and lived there with a subsistence culture that included gathering, harvesting material from the sea, from the coastal regions, and from the inland. There would have been some timber, some lumber on the island as well, but by the time the Europeans were finished with it, say the early 19th century or so, most of that lumber had been consumed, either for firewood or building purposes or whatever. So that's one of the big problems that, in fact, the boat builders of the 19th century found. They didn't have enough lumber to actually construct the sort of boats that they needed, so they came up with a couple of creative solutions.
Kevin, before you.
Okay, I hope that's better. Anyway, so this is Adrian Block's boat. He actually constructed it in that region, not on Block Island itself, but on the coast not too far away. It's called Onrust or Restless. Obviously, this is a modern iteration, a modern recreation. The keel of this one, I just want to sort of do a little bit of a parallel here. It was laid back in 2006 and launched in 2009. The New York State's Quadricentennial. Has anyone ever seen this boat, by the way? Okay. I don't know if she's still in operation or not. I haven't been able to find out that information. I didn't dig far enough, we'll say. But it was built mainly by volunteers under the supervision of shipbuilding professionals. Does that sound familiar, right? We've actually done that here too. And I imagine as we embarked a little bit after the time that this was actually produced, this boat was produced, I imagine that we also sought their advice about how to go about building a period craft like this. Anyway, her design is sort of like a classic, we'll say, Dutch yacht of the period of the early to mid 17th century or so. And it was in this vessel, or rather her earlier form, that Adrian Block discovered, and that's the word discovery obviously in inverted commas because there were people already there who well and truly knew about Block Island and called it Manassas. He discovered it, for the Dutch at least, back in about 1614. And of course, as is the habit of some, we'll say, intrepid explorers, he decided to call it Block Island after himself. English settlement began in 1661, so this is just a little map that Block himself drew of that region, and I think he's responsible for the first naming of some of the coastal regions around New England. They called it, I think, New Amsterdam, if I'm correct. Anyway, the Dutch didn't do much with Block Island, and so in 1661, the English came along and settled it definitively, and they called it New Shoreham. It was named Block Island again in 1876, but it's borne actually a couple of other names as well. But so if you see the name New Shoreham in association with this particular landmass, it's because of that English period. Looks like a really pretty place to visit, a great place for a vacation, or to go sailing if the weather is nice. There's a couple of lighthouses, one on the north and one on the south of the island. But these weren't there for a lot of the 19th century, or at least they weren't effectively there. And so that leads to all sorts of problems as far for seafarers, because every so often, if the weather's inclement or the visibility isn't great, you can run into the shore of the island yourself if you don't know it's there. And that's exactly what happened frequently in the 19th century. By the 1870s or so, remember this is again a view of it, some pretty exclusive real estate by the size of the houses and that sort of thing. And you can see it's kind of, as I was saying, reminiscent a little bit of the coast of Point Loma, those drop-offs down to a shingle beach or a rocky beach and so on. And a lighthouse that kind of reminds me a little bit of Point Loma Lighthouse too. You think otherwise, but just got my attention there. Anyway, these lighthouses were great, but before their location there at the island, seafarers had a challenge to actually avoid some of the shores. Block Island itself, this I think is the coat of arms of the island, and you'll see here the strong maritime influences, and also probably of the English as well, with the English line there. Up in the top right, a two-ender, right, a double-ender Block Island boat probably featured on the coat of arms. And this is Block Island in the heyday of its maritime links with the mainland, with other parts of New England. You see a variety of boats there, lots of schooners and that sort of thing. That was some of the favoured transport, an early steam ferry as well. But all that only occurs, this sort of intense maritime activity, only occurs towards the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, once the harbour had been constructed and breakwaters had been put in place. Up until that point, finding a secure place to moor your boat was pretty challenging, apparently, especially with the prevailing wind conditions at certain times of the year. And so that was the solution that, towards the middle of the 19th century, the local fishermen came up with, driving sturdy stakes into the shoreline and giving a place that you could actually secure your boat to. Right? And it also, this method of securing watercraft, small watercraft, also I think significantly influences the design of the Block Island cowhorn, because if you had a larger one, that was about the only way you could actually haul her up onto the sand, onto the beach, using oxen and essentially hauling her up there with the catch of fish. Smaller ones could be pushed up on board on dry land by a couple of crewmen, father and son team. But the larger ones, that was their solution. Haul them through the surf and tie them up securely on dry land. So, looking around here, early map there. Again, I think I got that off the Historical Society website. These are the known shipwrecks recorded around Block Island. You see quite a few. So it wasn't exactly all plain sailing by any means. In fact, I have here, if I remember rightly, a little quote that I'll find in a moment regarding the sailing conditions in that region. Depending on whether it was a westerly breeze or a southeasterly breeze, you could be caught on lee shore relatively quickly. But even this, I think, also influences something of the design and the construction of these boats. Remember, I was telling you that by the 19th century, most of the natural lumber, such as it was on Block Island, had been extracted and used for either firewood or maritime construction activities, or housing and that sort of thing. And so what the fishermen of Block Island did was they had to basically haul in the lumber that they were using to construct their vessels. So they had two sources, as far as I can tell. They could bring it in from the mainland, from Rhode Island or elsewhere, on the boats that they had, which was, I think, the common method. But there was also another method, because of all these shipwrecks are around the island. So what have you got? Well, you've got a lot of stuff that eventually washes up. And I have not been able to find this documented, but I'm absolutely sure that the fishermen would not have been above gathering the lumber that they extracted from the wrecks on the coast of Block Island and refurbishing them, reusing them. Think of Jim Davis, what he would have done, for example. Gold mine, right? Don't quote me on that one. Again,
we will.
So anyway, I have not found this documented, but I cannot imagine that all that lumber sitting there would have just been used for firewood. I'm sure it would have been repurposed, and I'm sure some of it ended up in some of the early Block Island horn boats that were produced during the 19th century. So what about the origins of this design, right? The origins of the Block Island boat? Well, here there's a little bit of a discussion among the experts, among online resources, among the books. And I do actually have some bibliographic references. If anyone wants them, we have quite a few little books in the library that do instruct us on the origins of this and very similar designs. So, are they English, Scandinavian, Dutch, or is it a quintessential American design? In fact, it's likely to be a combination of a number of these, I think. So first up, let's look at the English, we'll say the English contribution. This guy here, Truston Dodge, he is credited in some of the histories with being the designer, the first designer of the cow horn. He was one of the first English settlers on Block Island. This is a memorial to his achievements and that sort of thing, and his fellow settlers. But there's a discussion, and while he has the cow horn attached to his name, most students, most we'll say experts in boat building and that sort of thing, say he probably wasn't the inspiration, or his ideas weren't the inspiration for the construction of the cow horn. This is a grave marker, or family grave marker there on, I believe it is on the island too. So, if not him, where did the boat come from? There are others in the literature that would suggest, given the similarity between the cow horn design and other boats, like, for example, the Chewbacca boat or the Pinky, produced around that part of New England, that these boats also contributed somewhat to the design. That's certainly possible as well. And if you look at, for example, I think I might have the next slide here. These are the lines. I believe it's not a Pinky. You can see if you eventually look at some of the other designs I have here, like this one. This is lines taken off a late 19th, early 20th century cow horn. There are some similarities, slight difference probably with the shape of the keel and also with the stern here. But you can see there's likely to be similar influence. In fact, there are a whole bunch of double-enders that were produced in New England during the 19th century or 18th century or so. And so there's probably a lot of dialogue between fishermen and merchants, cargo carriers and that sort of thing about, what was the best boat to use under these circumstances. Other cool things about this sort of design, you'll see here the ballasting is a series of stones, beach stones, and that sort of thing. Very handy if you're fishing, because if you have a good catch, all you do is you throw over the expendable stones and you're able to balance your boat nicely that way. The other really prominent part of this design, I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but I've got the slide up here, I might as well talk about it. The we'll say the very level or flat keel, that obviously is really, really handy if you're having to haul her up on a beach or over a cobblestone beach and that sort of thing. And very, very durable as well. These were noted for being, if not graceful sailors, very, very sturdy, very safe. The word that comes up a lot in the literature is seaworthy. Very, very safe. So this, I think, is probably likely to be the initial inspiration of the cow horn, or maybe a combination of these. These are Dutch vessels from the 17th century, smaller lighters and fishing vessels and that sort of thing. The artist is, I believe, Willem van der Velde the Younger, and these illustrations are conserved in Greenwich, if I'm correct. So if you look at the lines of these boats, just the general style of the way in which they're being operated, very, very reminiscent of the way in which the cow horns were employed as well. Another image here, a canal scene, very similar types of vessels, and here also very similar to the Block Island design. From what I've read too, there are authors and experts who would think that the design was somewhat influenced by Scandinavian design. In fact, one of the major authors on this type of boat, Taylor is his name, he would say that the hull itself is probably thoroughly Dutch in design. No, the hull was Scandinavian, but the rig was likely to be Dutch, so maybe a combination. But like I'm saying, you've really got to weigh these options up when you look at the cow horn. Is it purely American? Because it certainly is produced on the East Coast, right? Is it Dutch design? Yeah, you can see reminiscences of classic Dutch design. Is it Scandinavian? Possibly. English? Yeah, that probably has something to do with it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've sailed those boats in North Holland and Friesland, and they're called shoulders. And if you see the side drop keel, so you put that down on the leeward side, and they are flat bottom boats. The problem with Holland is about 5 to 10 feet underwater, and everything is shallow. So these boats that you're pointing out right here are very useful for inland waterways, which have a lot of wind because it comes right off the North Sea. They're not real good in oceans, but when you show those boats, I've sailed those boats, and exactly what you show.
Okay, thank you for affirming that. Great insight. Yeah.
Yes, this is years back, but while sailing, while taking a cruise on the Nivernais Canal in France, we ran into a couple of flat-bottom, dual leeboard boats, similar to what's drawn there. And we had tied up for the night, and I quizzed the captain of one of the boats, and he said, well, they're ideal because on the canal, if I want to stop, I just drop both keels. That's brakes. I'm stopped. I'm not going anywhere. And then in the morning, when we get up, we haul them up, and away we go. So we were having to take our canal boat and find a place to warp it up on the side of the canal safely. This guy could any place that was wide enough to pass, he'd drop them. So I can see it's evident that at least for a time, these boats in the Block Island area were using that method of stopping in that bight. Do you know when they stopped putting the leeboards on?
I have not seen actually leeboards in the classic design. I'll have a
So
look
it
at this.
predated.
Yeah, I believe so. I've not seen in the literature or in the visual evidence of the early cowhorns any sign of leeboard at all.
And now I will point out that the fellow I talked to, his boat was very short-masted and it was motorized because it was a recent boat. But it became evident that this was a big deal, especially in shallow and inland waterways in Europe. Therefore, I mean, we saw the leeboards on Herr Bloch's original boat that you showed earlier.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So David.
I understand Block Island Schooner. Do we know anything about how the word cowhorn comes into it? What is the
Okay,
cowhorn?
good question. Yeah. Let me see if my next picture. Yeah. If you look at it, sort of the profile, what do you see? Kind of pointing up at either end. Kind of looks like a cow horn. So again, think of this as a culture. It's an agricultural culture. It's a fishing culture. Lots of cows and sheep, or I imagine sheep. Anyway, fishing obviously. This design was intended, we'll say, for a number of reasons. It could be manhandled or hauled up on the beach. Right, nice flat keel. The high bow and stern contributed to its seaworthiness, and then the low midships area. If you're fishing, you've got a net or line fishing or whatever, you want to be able to haul in the catch relatively easy. Am I running out of time? 10 minutes? Okay, cool. You've got to hold that catch in relatively easily, and so that's also part of the design as well, is to be able to not break your back as you're doing this day in and day out. Alrighty, let me keep on go along here. That actually illustrates exactly what I was talking about, right? The fact that you could relatively easily bring catch on board. Remember, if you have a good catch, what are you going to do? Throw over the ballast stones and that sort of thing. You can always get some more back on the beach as you need it. And just a couple of illustrations there, just to kind of give it a bit of contemporary flavour, we'll say. Now, by the end of the 19th century, most of these had gone, what I call, to sort of borrow a term from we'll say, natural history, and they'd gone extinct. They were no longer work boats, right? Motorization had come in, a little bit like the story we see in the Star of India and other vessels that you curate and tell. the story of, they were superseded by motorization. And so the cow horns eventually fall into disuse. But in their heyday, the records state that there were about 60 or 70 of these on the island in the late, mid to late 19th century. That was when they're in their heyday. So you can imagine the custom was for the entire fishing fleet to head out to the banks together in the morning. They would configure the sails so that they had some sort of a stable fishing platform and that sort of thing, and then fish away and then head back into port late in the day. And there will be, according to the oral histories and so on that have survived and the testimonies that have survived, they would race back to see who could get back into port or to shore the first. Again, this is another rendition of the lines of the boat. This comes out of Chapelle. The earlier plans I showed you were recorded, probably the earliest plans we have actually, and they're found in Rudder magazine from about 1912, I think. And they were the lines were taken off a famous, and one of the very last surviving original cow horns called the Alice M. This was produced by Howard Chapelle in about the 1940s or so. But again, remember, the original designs, no plans whatsoever. It was simply what the father and son team or the fishermen could actually produce with the needs that they had, with the funds that they had, with the lumber that they had as well. And again, you'll see here, that's why they call it a cow horn. Obviously, side on looks exactly like two horns of a cow if you want to use your imagination. Colours, this is a little bit, I think, more of an artist's imagination. From what I'm told, what I've read, the standard colour was kind of like a pea green colour with maybe a black or white stripe on the gunnels and that sort of thing. So not quite this colour, and the bottom would be coated in verdigris just to inhibit the growth of barnacles. So this obviously more of a contemporary boat, but very traditional. Also, these boats were rarely decked. Okay, there would be a little deck, sort of like a foredeck almost, up near the bow that would be used to store things under. But the traditional design, no decking whatsoever. And I wanted to point out one really interesting design feature. I'm not sure to what extent this is replicated in other similar types of boats, but if you look at the stern here, you've got that rack, and it's called, I believe, a comb, a tiller comb. Yeah, the tiller comb. Why do you think you would use that? What would be the purpose of that? You see what I'm talking about here? Yeah. Why would you want a tiller comb there? Or what does it do? Holds the tiller in place, right? So imagine if you've got a two-person, fishing team there, and you happen to haul in the lines or the nets, and I'm not sure if net fishing was common or if it was line fishing was more common. I don't have a handle on that yet. In any case, what you do is you'd actually position the tiller and then go forward and maybe assist with the sails or with the lines or whatever. So that was the purpose of this. And if this next little slide here shows you, it's a little bit unclear, but it shows you exactly where these tiller combs were positioned, located. Yeah, kind of like today, very few originals are actually in existence. This one, I believe, from my contact in the Historical Society there on Block Island, this is, I think, a half replica. It's like a half-size replica of an original. And from what I've been told, the archivist, the curator, was going to ask around and see if any of the older residents had memories rather of how these boats were employed, or even contacts regarding the restoration. There may well be some restoration projects going on somewhere on Block Island, but my sense is that most of these original boats have actually disappeared. Except on the west coast, which is, again, kind of interesting when you think about it, that while they've gone into extinction as commercial vessels, they received a sort of a rejuvenation during the early to mid 20th century for recreational boaters. So around about the 1930s, 1940s, apparently 5 or 6 cow horns were built up in the San Pedro area. And of them, I don't know if Happy Return, if she was actually constructed up there or not. The next one I'm going to show you certainly was. She is here. These are one of the 3. She's one of the 3 cow horns currently on San Diego Bay. Happy Return. It's about 22 foot long, built in 34 or 49. I couldn't find definitive answers online for that one. A catch rig and a wooden hull. And then this was the one that was actually offered to us prior to Scrimshaw. A larger vessel, 40 feet long, built in San Pedro, the Iantha, built in 1945. Douglas fir planks, spruce masts, and spars. She looks a little bit more like a yacht to my eye than a genuine cow horn, with the addition of some sail and spreaders and that sort of thing, a bowsprit and so on. So she's adapted more to a little more maybe aggressive recreational boating, you could say. Nevertheless, what about our own? If I could jump to that at least. Sailing characteristics, lots of adjectives, but one that comes up very frequently is sea kindly, well adapted to handling at sea. Apparently, you can kind of get an impression of what might be have been necessary. Planks, I'm forgetting the technical term for these, could be affixed to the midships area in order to stop the spray and waves from coming in under certain circumstances. And here we have Scrimshaw, our own Scrimshaw now, off the coast of San Diego, off Point Loma, in fact, sailing a few years ago, and she looks pretty lively there. Yeah, someone said wet. Yeah, I believe so. Sea kindly, I'm not sure. I think the jury's going to be out on sea kindly, okay? We're going to have to see how it goes. But yeah, she looks very graceful there, to my eye, at least.
Kevin, are you going to restrict it to the bay, or is it going to be offshore also?
I think initially to the bay, I don't really have a handle on exactly how it's going to play out. I think for tours and that sort of thing, it'll be similar to what we do with pilot and swiftboat, restricted to the bay. Maybe eventually the more brave might want to head out further beyond Point Loma. But I know I'm running out of time, right, Jim? 3 minutes. Okay, so here we go, guys. You can also make a model. There's a limited edition model that's been produced, and the guy who's making them may well produce more. But I thought this might be a kind of a cool project. Our ship modelers oftentimes have a group project every year. This might be something that they might look into, producing a series of models of the cow horn. And then restoring Scrimshaw. So I always say as collections manager, there's no such thing as a free donation, right? And it's absolutely true also with boats, as much as with, compasses or whatever. Eventually you start to pay for them. And we do pay for them because we want them and because they benefit us, obviously. But Scrimshaw, from what I understand, had something of a checkered past. Now, let's find a note here about this. She was constructed in the late 1940s up in San Pedro for a guy called Preston Sturges, who was a Hollywood film writer. I don't know the name. Do you guys know the name?
Yes.
Okay, right. Director and producer, right? Okay. He was also an avid sailor, but maybe not so good with his money, because he ended up, I think, running off to France, to Paris, living there, and avoiding the IRS. So, in a sense, Scrimshaw is a casualty of that era, we'll say, of the 1940s, and a high-living film producer. He produced, or he had this dream of constructing a cow horn, having it capable of taking long voyages. So that's why she is the way she is, to a certain extent, planked with a cabin, all that sort of thing. But he produced this one called Simple Simon. Simple Simon because of the simple rig. If you look at the rigs of the classic cow horns, there's no standing rigging, right? And in fact, the masts are hinged in such a way that you can bring them down very easily. And that was all part of the integrity of the early design. So Simple Simon, I've got a whole lot of information here about that. Why is Simple Simon important? Because it was never launched until 1961, when a couple bought her and renamed her Scrimshaw. And then they never really did much with her, and it wasn't until New Year's Day 1976 that this guy Dennis Doust actually purchased Scrimshaw from the couple, and he ends up sailing Scrimshaw down to Mexico and back. But I think from what I've heard, there might have been a little bit of deferred maintenance, as you'll see. And I have all the statistics here. Now, this is what we inherited. Remember what I said, no such thing as a free donation. And I have all the numbers here I can share with you very, very quickly of what they found and what they did. Great condition, right? So I'm just zipping through this. And again, I want to pay tribute to our volunteers and staff who worked so hard on this. But there she is, back in the water. That's what they're going to do with her. And there she is, sailing off into the sunset. So let me just give you those quick statistics, if I may. The carpenters replaced approximately 20 to 30 planks. All right. The buttlocks throughout were found to be wasted. Whole process took, I believe, about 2.5 months or so. The hull was wooded down, scraped down, that sort of thing to get it, you know, the frames and whatever. A whole bunch of sister frames were added to the original framing. The galvanized fasteners, you saw some of them there, replaced with silicon bronze screws, and white oak sister frames were used to secure the pre-existing frames, and they were secured with steel carriage bolts. They spiled the planks, which means, I guess the fancy way of saying you cut out a plank and then you match it with a new one, right? And the carpenters reported a kind of a domino effect. Once they started doing something, something else came to light almost immediately, and they had to fix that too, and so it went. New zincs added, 500 new fasteners were used in the restoration process, and then eventually she gets back in the water. So that's it. We will be using her in a few weeks' time for education programs, a very focused education program, and also obviously for recreational activities on the bay with paying customers. I hope to add to this talk in future years if you'll have me back. But that at least is the story that I know of Scrimshaw. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you, Kevin. Scrimshaw, as you were informed from this talk, is a new acquisition, and so we didn't have a section really researched out on the boat. Kevin has just done all that himself, and will expand the manual for next year. But pretty much whatever this presentation gave you may show up on the exam, but nothing more than that. Well, Ben, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Good morning, Vietnam.
Why is this camera here now?
I don't know. Yeah, that's this man right here.
I thought that was a good idea.
Okay, double action here. Okay, our objective here today is help you tell a story about swimming that you enjoy, the visitor enjoys. And we're going to do that in 2 ways. One is we're going to talk about the frequently asked questions. For those of you having exam anxiety, if you listen to that part, we're covered. But then I expect you to graduate storytellers, and that's where we're going to go.
That's not on the deck.
That's our bread and butter. FAQs, frequently asked questions, will help you with that. Our real value, though, is eliciting comments from the visitors. We're going to be looking at Alex's handiwork here, FAQs. I think we can find that on the internet now. There are, I think, about 23 of them, those questions. I'm going to go through some of them, but I'm going to put all of them up on the screen so you can see where they're going. And we'll look at the first couple of ones. But here's an example of eliciting comments. You're down at that end of the deck here, and somebody's looking down at the swift boat and the submarine, and they say, "What is that down there?" You tell them what it is, but then you say, "Hey, can you see those flags? Can you see those pennants that are flying there?" And then you've hooked them. You silver-tongued devil, you've got them to ask the question. Okay? So what are the flags? Basically, we have the U.S. flag, the Malta flag, the prisoner of war flag. We'll get into why we have these in a moment. And occasionally the American Legion Yacht Club flag, and again, we'll get into those. What are the ribbons or the medals? These are the names, but if you try and tell them to the visitor, their eyeballs will just roll up, okay? So really, you want to tell stories about them. The first one, all the way up and on the left, closest to the sailor's heart, combat action ribbon. The emphasis is on action. You can't hunker down in a bunker and get this ribbon. By the way, there's no medal to it. It corresponds to the combat action badge for the infantry. The other ones talk very briefly here about awards for valor. We've heard them before: the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross for Navy and Marines, the Silver Star, and the Bronze Star. Skip the Medal of Honor, okay? But we're also going to talk about units, groups of swift boats called divisions. If they were to, these are awards that they got, unit commendations that carry the valor that if an individual would do it, would be the equivalent of a Navy Cross, a Silver Star, and a Bronze Star. And so that's the story you want to tell. You don't want to have the name of it, all right? The bottom three lines are just the stuff from the South Vietnam, or Republic of Vietnam. The middle one here is a Guidong flag, alive in '65. And then this one here is basically the Vietnam Service Medal, 13 awards for the 5 years that the swift boats were in Vietnam. And this was kind of the boundaries for getting that medal. If you were, out in the ocean, notice Dixie Station and Yankee Station. Those were carrier bases. Once we set up ashore in Vietnam, Dixie Station shut down, but Yankee Station worked throughout the war. But the point was, the commander of that was the commander of 7th Fleet, 2,000 miles away in Japan. Are the weapons on the boat real? No. Ever since 9/11, they have not trusted us with real weapons. These are replicas. The ammunition may have been real at one time, but hopefully remains inert. Okay, the 50 caliber machine guns, we love those. You will notice throughout this presentation our formal uniforms. This is the forward gun mount. It's air-cooled, heavy barrel, 50 caliber machine gun, Mark II. The original version was water-cooled. This one says we're not going to water-cool it anymore, so we're going to call it Mark II, known affectionately by gunners around the world as Madu. There was a certain culture back in the 60s, enough said. But I want to point out here, this tube here, a light anti-tank weapon system. We'll get into that in a moment. This is really down in the weeds, but just I wanted to make a point here. Our belted ammunition, every 5th round was a tracer, and they were all armored piercing, which was the same loadout that Jack Kennedy had on 109 boat in World War II, and was great against lightly armed Japanese destroyers, and great against trawlers in in the Vietnam War. We'll talk about those in a moment. But most of us never encountered a trawler. I never did. But I encountered lots of shore bunkers. And this was a terrible loadout for shore bunkers. Just didn't work very well. And if your loadout against your common enemy doesn't work very well, the results are his incoming fire gets more effective. That's from an AK-47 round. Okay, that's a busy slide there, but this is the aftergun mount. It was designed by a Coast Guard warrant officer, a Ma-Deuce machine gun on top of a mortar. Most of our ammunition, basically our high explosives and white phosphorus for the mortar, was point detonating fuse, but the elimination rounds, the star shells, required you setting a time in there. So we had mechanical time fuse setters, as indicated here. We do not have them on 816. The mortars could be fired either in drop fire or trigger fire mode. There's my chief of the boat working on Mount 52 at the causeway at Chulai. Getting back to the mortars, trigger fire or drop fire mode. Trigger fire, you suppress the firing pin, put the round in the mortar, and then when you wanted to, you pull the trigger. Very, very accurate out to about 1,000 yards, but very, very difficult to work with. 10 of the 50 swift boat sailors who died from mortar accidents. Our personal weapons. We had 10. We had M16 rifles, shotguns, mortars. I'm going to pass around some personal weapons here. And when they sent us up the rivers and canals, they added the M60 machine gun to our table of equipment. Unofficially, our weapons were whatever we could steal. Some of us like to steal light anti-tank weapon systems. You've seen that before. They were a great bunker buster. Operational command structure, pretty poor. Okay. But let me talk very briefly about the swift boats getting started in 1965. We had PCFs 1 and 2 come in for training in the summer. By the end of the year, we had 6 training boats in San Diego, 8 operational boats in country. A place called Anthoy, an island off of Cambodia. Our boats would come in from super seacraft, Berwick, Louisiana. We'll talk about that in a moment. But they would come by surface transport to the Philippines, to Subic Bay, where we would have our final outfitting with things that we didn't want lying around the port of New Orleans. Things like morphine for your first aid kits. And then they would be taken in the well decks of amphibious ships incrementally to South Vietnam, basically to one of 5 locations. And here's the original ones we talked about at Anthoy, that little island down there, and to the other 5 as indicated. Here's the order that they came in. The numerical order is pretty much the chronological order in which they were established, but you can see they were established very, very quickly at the end of 65 to 1966. But almost immediately, we decided we didn't want to be there. Okay, and so you notice the PCF Division 105, which became Coastal Division 15, had about 3.5 years in Vietnam before they left. Our theme song was written by Eric Burton and the Animals. We got to get out of this place. The 5 that we just talked about, most of the divisions had detachments, geographical detachments. Certainly that was the case in my division, Coastal Division 12 in Da Nang. They had the detachments as indicated there. The one in Chulai became very active in 1967, and they started pouring reinforced swift boats in there from less active places. And so we formed a separate Coastal Division 16 for a while, and then when things died down, we set it down. Okay, operational commanders and administrative commanders. Our administrative commander, lieutenant, was responsible for providing the craft and the crews and the schedules and repairing them and so forth. And he also wrote the fitness reports for the officers in charge. So there was that. Okay, the operational commander was responsible for employing them with his other assets. To talk about the operational commanders, they were based on Task Force 115 was the name of the operation, Coastal Surveillance Force Operation Maritime. South Vietnam was divided into 4 tactical zones, 4 corps, 3 corps, 2 corps, not 1 corps. We called it I Corps. We had to tell the communist troops that we knew Roman numbers, I guess. Okay, but the task group commanders under 115.1, .2, and so forth corresponded to those tactical zones. So here's kind of what it would look like. I'm in my patrol boat off of Da Nang. I report for administrivia to my administrative commander, who is here at the Vietnamese Navy base, and I reported for tactical stuff to the operational commander. Who is Admiral Zumwalt? We saw the results of his grooming standards last week. He was a Vice Admiral, 3 stars, Command of Naval Forces Vietnam, 68 to 70, Operation Sea Lords, which we'll get into in a moment. Accelerated turnover to Vietnam, we've already talked about that with getting rid of the swift boats. Authorized Agent Orange spraying. One of the recipients of that was his son, who was a swift boat skipper in the Delta, and he died of those of the result of that. Book about that is My Father, My Son. And then Zumwalt went on to be a 4-star admiral, the youngest CNO in our history. Zumwalt class destroyers, just very quickly. Basically, our swift boat tour is both Vietnam history, but also the Navy in San Diego today. So we have 3 Zumwalt class destroyers. There was going to be 32, then there was 28, then there was 7, and now there's 3, and that was it. I mean, financially, it just didn't work. And the real problem with that is, if you look at the forward gun mounts that they had, the cost of ammunition went from like $400,000 a round to $1 million a round. We can't afford the bullets, so the guns are no good, so they're ripping the guns out. Zumwalt is already back in a Mississippi shipyard having those guns ripped out and having hypersonic missile tubes put in. Michael Mansour, the 2nd ship, still operating out of San Diego, but she'll be gone back to Mississippi probably next year. And Lyndon Johnson, not yet commissioned. This last one is already in Mississippi. Is the Zumwalt destroyer a destroyer? Well, here's kind of the specifics for the Arleigh Burke destroyers. We have about 16 of them home ported here. They are named for famous men and women. You can see the dimensions on them. The Ticonderoga class cruisers, named for famous battles. We have about 4 or 5 of them here. The Navy hates them. They're killing them. They'll be gone in a couple of years. And then you see the Zumwalt. They dwarfs off them, 600 feet long, 16K ton. Swift boats in Vietnam. Mark II. It's just an enhancement on the first swift boats. If you look down below at the swift boat at war thing, you'll see a model of PCF 104, which is a Mark I. And then you can look at the other swift boat in the water, Mark II, and the differences are listed there. But if you're talking to visitors, the main thing to tell them is a Mark II has much more trip hazards. On 1 December 1970, the last increment of swift boats were turned over from the U.S. Navy to the South Vietnamese Navy. That included 5 Mark IIIs that are pictured here. They're just supersized Mark IIs. The Mark III's really, Mark II's were really a drop in the bucket in Vietnam, 3 of them, and they only lasted a couple of months before they were turned over. The Mark V's a little bit longer. If you do the math, basically 99% was Mark I, and as indicated there, the others. Okay, so if you talk to as a visitor who is on swift boats, and you say, yeah, that's a Mark II boat, and they say, what the hell is a Mark II boat? That was my first question, because we never knew about Mark II boats. We were all Mark I's, retroactively. So those are the facts. Okay. What we'd like to talk about now, and if you just look at that, get over your exam anxiety or test anxiety. But what we really want to talk about is how you tell stories. In addition to the FAQs, Alex has got there our narrator script builder, and this has to do with facts versus storytelling. Be comfortable with those facts, but be more comfortable with your skills, and we're going to talk about examples of that. Here's basically what the script guide talks about. It outlines the track of the swift boat and the things you're going to see visually, and then some words that you can say on each one of them. You can use that if you're interested, but if you want to come and maybe become a narrator, that's fine. Mike Kay, are you here today? Yeah, Mike narrates for us. So obeying Willie Nelson, we'll get on the road here. Welcome aboard. Thanks for visiting the Maritime Museum. And thanks for riding with us as we tour the U.S. Navy in San Diego and take a trip down Swift Boat Memory Lane. Navy Instructor School 101, tell them what you're going to tell them. Swift Boat we're riding today is on the National Register of Historic Places. We've got 4 of those as indicated there. First came here to San Diego in 1968 to help train sailors. That training had been going on since 1965. And here's the list of the training boats that we had and when they came on service. You can see that we had 6 of them here by 1965. PCF 104 came in the next year, and then PCF 816 and 813 and sister craft came here in 1968. You don't need to know all these dates, just have an idea. There was more than those 2 boats that were doing the training. And here's a picture of the 7 boats that we had before the arriving of the 813 and 816 at the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. In the background is the Coronado Yacht Club, Glorieta Bay in the middle. Okay, take a look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but PCF 18, we'll get PCF 8, we'll get to that, back to that later. Okay, so again, continuing with our narrative. That training had been going on here since 1965. And if you take a look around at this a beautiful harbor, and picture the Pacific Ocean out past our bow, again, bring the visitor into the narrative, you begin to appreciate what a great place San Diego is to train small boat sailors, large harbor, and open ocean operations, what the navies of the world call blue water operations. But by 1969, the focus in swift boat operations in Vietnam had shifted to the brown waters of the deltas and the rivers and the canals, and the blue water training here was no longer relevant, so it was shifted up to Vallejo. A great brown water training environment up there at the northern edge of San Francisco Bay. Official definitions of blue and brown water, you can read them, but I guess, you kind of know it when you see it, right? That's sort of a visual, you know it when you see it. If you can kind of accept that line of reasoning, you're on the same track as Otter Stewart, Supreme Court Justice. I know it when I see it. Now, of course, he was talking about dirty books and dirty movies, rather than this, but there you go. If you do the math, probably 55 to 60% of swift boat sailors were blue water sailors, not brown waters, just in terms of how things went. And so again, if you have a visitor and you point to the swift boat and say, yeah, that was part of the brown water Navy, and he fails open, that's why, okay? He's a blue water sailor. here's PCF 104 doing some training in the Vallejo waters, good groundwater training. Now, once we went to Vallejo, we still did occasional blue water training. They would come out of Vallejo, go under the Golden Gate Bridge, and out off of Point Reyes. In one of those cases, December 1969, PCF 8 was swamped by a rogue wave and destroyed. The crew was managed to swim to shore and survive. So that was the last swift boat we lost during the Vietnam War, but not in Vietnam. Okay. In any case, as indicated, December 1970, all the swift boats were turned over to South Vietnamese Navy. We're out of a job in Vallejo. This PCF 813 and 816 are given to Malta. The capital is Valletta. So you can talk about going from Vallejo to Valletta if you're alliteratively oriented. Lots of different names for these boats. You may, if you're talking to somebody from Malta, they may talk about it in terms of their designations, P23, P24. We used to have that on the boat down there before we painted it over. Couple of things, PCF 813 and 816 Marvelous Adventure. In September of 1984, 813 boat, the other boat, had fireworks on the bow, taking them out to dump. These are not your father's cherry bombs, okay? They went off for some reason. Of the crew of 8, 7 were killed. We called them the Magnificent Seven. It looked like a U.S. swift boat in Vietnam after getting a B-40 rocket hit. These are the 6 that died, or the 7 that died. So back to the flags. Okay, we are now a memorial to both countries, and we serve the flags of both countries, observe proper flag etiquette. Both flags are the same size, same height. U.S. flag is host country to starboard, and then we're also flying the prisoner of war missing in action flag in honor of the 6 Swifties that are missing in actions for U.S. to Malta. So I don't want to just gloss over that, so passing around here is kind of the names of the Maltese and the U.S. and pictures of our 4 U.S. Swifties who are missing in action. Yeah, what happened there? Sorry about that. Yeah, there they are, and there'll be pictures coming by on that. Okay, back to the cruise. About this time, we're at the Midway. So we point out the Midway, commissioning the world's largest ship until 1955. It was had the first confirmed air-to-air kills of the war and the last. The dates indicated there, and so it was kind of bookends on the air war in Vietnam. War that generated way too many POWs, more on that later. And the first skipper was said to come from a good family. Just wrapping up here, here's a picture of Midway with the old Navy headquarters long, so you can tell this is really old, okay? But I wanted to bring in one part of the Navy in San Diego in this part here. You notice the gold anchors indicates a ship tops in its class for re-enlistment. In other words, high crew morale. Now later on, we'll get down to the Navy. I'll point out ships with gold anchors and I'll say, can you see the flag that they're flying from the yardarm there? Okay, it's a white triangle with a black insert like that. Okay, that's an absentee pennant. Now this is on a Saturday afternoon. Okay. If you have a captain who's on board his or her ship in home port on a Saturday afternoon, morale sucks. That's a Navy term. Okay. So as we go, see if you can correlate the absentee pennant, which indicates the captain has cracked that code, he's gone. Doggone it, sir, go home, kick the dog, watch a ball game, get out of here, with the gold anchors. Again, try and bring your visitors into the story. Just another picture of what that looks like there. Okay, so we've talked to you about PCF 16, training off the coast of California, guarding off the coast of Malta. What about the swift boats in Vietnam? Well, let's start our trip down swift boat memory lane, South Vietnam, New Year's Day, 1965. There are 25,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam, aviators and advisors. There are no U.S. ground combat troops in Vietnam. There are, however, plenty of communist ground troops in Vietnam. How are they supplied? Particularly the ones that are by the coast. Okay, we know that the ones along here are supplied from the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we'll later find out the Sihanoukville Trail from Cambodia. But the ones on the coast, particularly in these three areas that I mentioned, are supplied from the sea. I mean, you can see how rudimentary the Ho Chi Minh Trail was, elephants and bicycles and so forth. Okay. And the concept of operations for that was very simple. You get yourself a trawler, fill it up with supplies in North Vietnam or Red China, and then go hang around in international waters off the coast of South Vietnam, where you eventually want to land. And then at the right time, let's say dark of the moon, midnight, make the run across the 12 miles of territorial waters. Your comrades are waiting for you on the beach, often with a bonfire, usually no marshmallows, certainly no s'mores. Okay, beach the boat, hopefully it's a sandy beach, unload the boat, and then before we started coastal surveillance, back off, head north. After that, after you started coastal surveillance, the boats were booby-trapped, the crew would leave the boat, and they would blow it up. Here are kind of the patterns that they would take. So our initial mission was to stop the flow of supplies from North Vietnam, Red China, to South Vietnam, communist troops in South Vietnam on the coast. Okay? Blue water missions out in the ocean. In February of '65, a trawler tried to do that at Vung Ro Bay. It was destroyed by South Vietnamese forces, but nobody was patting themselves on the back. If we caught one of these in 1,200 miles of coastline, how many have we missed? It didn't help that when we got the deck log, it indicated that this was the trawler's 23rd trip to South Vietnam. So we decided to blockade South Vietnam. Now the lawyers say we can't use that word. We used it proudly during the Civil War, okay, when we blockaded as indicated, but 2.5 years earlier than Vung Ro, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Jack Kennedy blockaded Cuba, he called it a quarantine. How medical. We called our blockade coastal surveillance. How visual. Interruption here. March 8th, the Marines finally landed in Vietnam. One battalion had an administrative landing in Red Beach 2 in the morning. Administrative landing means it was unopposed, other than by pretty girls and owl eyes with flowers. Okay, and then another one came in by air. 3 days later, they formed the Task Force 7 Vietnam Patrol Force. Again, the 7 indicates 7th Fleet, 2,000 miles away in Yokosuka, Japan. Primarily World War II era seaplanes patrolling in Vietnam. Secretary of the Navy asked the Secretary of Transportation, who ran Coast Guard back then, help, and the Coast Guard got patrol boats into Antoy and Da Nang by the end of July, 29 July, and 2 days later, we formed Task Force 115, Coastal Surveillance Force, the 100 designation indicates in Vietnam. So now we're pulling the command back to where it needs to be. Here were the boats, the Coast Guard boats, 82-foot boats. Again, with their final outfitting in Subic Bay, a nice formation coming out there. But they didn't have that fancy red thing on the front. But even the white paint was a problem when they were trying to be unobtrusive, loitering 500 yards off the beach at 4 o'clock in the morning. So the Commandant of the Coast Guard took the advice of his exterior color coordinator, Mick Jagger, and he painted it black. Okay, Navy, late in the game, but they picked a boat built by Seward Seacraft in Berwick, Louisiana, born in the Blue Bayou, southwest of New Orleans. The original versions of the boat already in service, the commercial versions, were used to take crews out to the oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. The Central Intelligence Agency operated 7 of these boats. I could tell you what the CIA did with them, but then you know I would have to. Now, as an aside, one of David's programs a couple of years ago, we actually talked about those 7 boats, and there were 2 Swifts in the Caribbean, 3 in Vietnam, and 2 on Lake Tanzania, that actually engaged in a firefight with Che Guevara. And we didn't kill you for telling you that. Those displaced about 18 tons, and the Navy's about 22 to 23 tons. So we doubled the displacement with the same propulsion plant, sneaking into engineering. You got to attack engineering. There's somebody who always wants that. So 2 Detroit 12 V71 diesels, 12 cylinders, 6x6V, 71 cubic inches of air for each cylinder. Supercharged just means we compress the air before it goes in. Turbocharged, not. Turbocharged has to do with the exhaust. The only thing we did with the exhaust was try to muffle it, and we failed at that completely. 2-stroke engine. Okay. We call them swift boats because they tolerated our juvenile desire to go fast. Swift is an attitude, not an acronym. Top speed, maybe 28 knots, 32 miles an hour. I will tell you though that any swift boat sailor you run into will affirm that he was on the fastest boat in Vietnam. Okay, we've seen this before, getting started, but Valentine's, 1966, New Year's Day, 1966, there's 185,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam, up from 25,000 the year before. Valentine's Day, PCF-4 is destroyed by a command-detonated mine. Of the crew of 6, 4 are killed. PCF-41 destroyed by a command-detonated mine in May. PCF-77 destroyed in heavy seas with the loss of 2 Swifties and a passenger. Over at the Naval Amphibious Base where the training is conducted, the instructor responsible for updating the lessons learned book has his homework assignment. I'll pass around a picture of a swift boat cruise, basically 6 sailors, 5 officers, and 1 enlisted. I'm sorry, 1 officer in charge and 5 enlisted. Yeah, Grade Creek. Here's kind of a summary, and you don't have to know this, but to give you a feeling for how it went in Vietnam for those 5 years. We started off on a very steep lessons learned curve in 1966. 13 of the Swifties were lost, 3 boats were lost, 2 of our 4 people who went missing in action were lost. Just to bring this up very quickly, this is the northern part of South Vietnam, up by the demilitarized zone, Route 1 right here. But we've lost 4 swift boats in that area, and 2 of our missing in action. Bernard Paul wrote a book called Street Without Joy. He was killed on Route 1, but you might read what Colin Powell said about that book. if the president had read that at Camp David on a weekend, he would come back and cancel the.
I can't read it from here. Could you read it out to us?
I recently read book on Vietnam, Street Without Joy. Paul makes painfully clear that we had almost no understanding of what we had gotten ourselves into. I cannot help thinking that if President Kennedy or President Johnson had spent a quiet weekend at Camp David reading the book, he would have returned to the White House Monday and immediately started to get us out of there. One person's opinion. Okay, we talked about losing 7 boats. Some people will say, well, the loss of 1 boat is a problem, but maybe understandable with 5 years of heavy seas and heavy combat. Well, let me tell you about 1 boat that's not on that list of 7 that we lost. Summer of 1967, PCF 97 goes on patrol off the Cao Mau Peninsula, the southern part of South Vietnam. Firefight in the afternoon. The next morning, 0500, close to the beach, they get hit by a B-40 rocket, seriously wounding the boat and the skipper. 97 runs out to sea, rendezvous with another swift boat. As the crew of 97 steps aboard that boat, the 97 boat sinks. The skipper of 97 boat is dusted off, medically evacuated by helo. It takes the Navy 2 weeks to find an amphibious ship with the right lift capability to pick that boat up off the bottom of the ocean. Takes it to Subic Bay. 6 months later, it's back on patrol. 3.5 years later, in November of 1970, it participates in the last U.S. Navy swift boat firefight of the war. So, we never lost PCF 97. We just temporarily misplaced it under about 40 feet of water for 2 weeks. And then it went to Subic Bay, where its salvage crew engaged in 6 months of debauchery at Olongapo. But we never lost PCF 97, and it doesn't count against it. Tell your story without shame. Okay. And these are some of the places we visit. Here's the crew that we talked about. Again, 1 officer, 5 enlisted. Everybody had to know everybody else's job. Here were the nominal rates and what it would equate to if they were on a destroyer. You notice khakis, dungarees. Nah, we had a modified uniform of the day once we got underway. We're up against the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal now on our trip. None of us had driven a swift boat before, and everybody had to learn how to drive a swift boat. So we would come over to the 10th Avenue Terminal, and each of us would take about 2 hours crashing into that pier until we got our boat handling skills right. I don't think the Port of San Diego has forgiven us yet. We also had language training. My first day of language training, I had to translate from English to Vietnamese. Please don't throw that hand grenade, little girl. Why do you have so many recoilless rifles underneath your nets, Mr. Fisherman? Perhaps our least favorite but most important training was survival, evasion, resistance to interrogation, and escape. Acronym SEER, prisoner of war oriented. Initially, U.S. Navy pilots mandated for that, most likely to become POWs. When they required us Swifties to go through the training, I did not care for the connotation. But anyway, they took us to the desert, about 60 miles northeast of here, a place called Warner Springs. Anybody been to the spa? Yep. Yeah, we didn't go to the spa. They convinced us we didn't have to eat anything for 2 weeks, for a week. And then for the last 2 days, they put us in a mock POW camp, a little fuzzy there, okay, where the interrogation sessions went something like this. Good morning, comrade, how are you? And then they would beat the crap out of you, stick it in a little box, pour water on you. I'm not going to talk about waterboarding today, no politics, but Dennis was the corpsman at that place. You could ask him later.
I was a recipient.
Yeah, and yeah. Ben was bored, waterboard, yeah. But I think see her work. My Naval Academy class, the class of 1964, we used to brag that we had the most classmates behind enemy lines. 5 of my classmates were POWs at the Hanoi Hilton, and those 5 and almost 600 others came home with honor, Operation Homecoming in 1973. Jim Stockdale, the senior U.S. Navy POW, credited SEAL training with their survival. Okay, again, Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, in the corner there is Vietnam Unit Memorial. Currently, well, that's where we trained at the amphibious base 65 to 69 during the Blue Water days. Currently, the activity on the base that's of most interest to us is a SWCC, Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewman. Guys, the sailors that drive the SEAL. I'm passing around a brochure from a recent graduation, class 133 from the SWCC class. You don't have to read the whole brochure, but I've highlighted on the back of that brochure a portion of the SWCC creed that says, "My heritage comes from the sailors who operated the PT boats of World War II and the combatant craft of Vietnam. The legacy of these warriors guides my actions." So I think the baton has been well passed. The SWCC sailors and the old Coastal Riverine sailors let us drive their SWCC boats, let us drive their boats. We don't need no stinking speed limits. Their electronics are a little intimidating. They have big words like G and P and S, but if you get by that, they're pretty cool. They graduate on a Thursday. On a Wednesday, I go and talk to them about their heritage. New Year's Day 1967, most of the 385,000 troops in Vietnam, most of the action that year will be in I Corps, the northern part of South Vietnam. Here's a demilitarized zone, Da Nang, where I'm talking about Chu Lai, Cape Patangan, and I Corps, 2 Corps border, and a place called, just south of Cape Patangan, a place that we call the Corral, so named because of the nearby coastal hamlet of Colay, and the fact that every time we went by there, we got shot at. Hence, gunfight at the Colay Corral with a white herb. April of 1967, I walked down to the causeway to get on PCF 99 to go on patrol. There was a U.S. Marine with a radio waiting for me there. Respectfully, he did not salute. In a sniper-rich environment, it was considered poor form to visually tag an officer. "You're working for us today, sir? Welcome aboard, shipmate. Where does our boss want us when?" Command and control was so much simpler back then. 2 hours later, we're off the Corral, a feet wet blocking force for a search, a Marine Corps search and destroy operation ashore. The locals ashore did not care for our presence. 3 automatic weapons positions opened up, 3 eyes blinking at us. We maneuvered, but the odds were not good. I was standing in the doorway of the pilot house thumping off M79 rounds. There's the M79 thumper. It made a distinctive thumping sound when it was fired. Full disclosure, has nothing to do with that cute little bunny. Badly. The Marine says, chattering on the radio, says, "You want me to take care of that, sir?" And I said, "Yeah, we can take care of that." 2 Marine F-4 Phantoms dropped vertically out of the sky, delivered their napalm, exited stage left. Has anybody seen the movie Apocalypse Now? Yeah, I will tell you, I do not love the smell of napalm in the morning. Okay, but Down, are you still here? Yeah. I do have some affection for the Marines who made those 3 eyes stop winking at me. Semper Fi, Don.
Semper Fi.
The next the next month, we were back at the corral, this time for psychological warfare. Stopping at the corral and playing a tape. Again, the locals responded. They shut up the speakers. Medevac Hilo took away my high frequency radio antenna, which meant I could no longer talk to my operational boss over the horizon in Da Nang. Oh, the tragedy. That was kind of, yeah, and I'm going to go through this real quick. I'm not going to bother you with more gunfight things, but there were 3 boats that backed me up at that time, and subsequently, one was abandoned. It ran aground and was abandoned. One was sunk by heavy seas, and one was sunk in combat. So it gives you an idea of the operational tempo. July, we captured a trawler, and we'll go through more of this on the boat later on. Tet Offensive 1968, pretty much spent, except in I-Corps, at the end of the month of February. 4 trawlers tried to resupply their comrades. 3 were destroyed by Coast Guard cutters, swift boats, and other forces. And one of them, still in international waters, took one look around at the opposition and said the Vietnamese equivalent of, never mind, and went back to Red China. Okay, I think we're going to cut through all of this. Yeah, Operation Sea Lords. 68, Zumwalt shows up, doesn't know how what to do. 2 swift boat skippers are going to show him how. One is Mike Brown. He goes into the river section here, Gulf of Thailand, comes out the other side. Guns blazing all the way because people didn't want him there. Mike Bernique did a similar thing between South Vietnam and Cambodia waterway. They're both hauled off to Saigon. Written orders not to go up rivers, but they're swift boat sailors, so what the hell. Eventually, Zumwalt decides to listen to them rather than court-martial them, gives them silver stars, kicks off Operation Sea Lords. The worst acronym in the history of the Navy, you can read it there. Coast Guard, we lost 7 Coast Guard sailors in Vietnam. We'll talk about the rest of that down at the boat. Check it down at the boat. So, very quickly, selling rides on a swift boat and a pilot boat. Yeah, we got 4 boats that go, but these are the 2 boats I'm going to talk about. Here's our script, the track for the swift boat, 75 minutes. Here's the track for the pilot boat. We try and keep both of them separate. And we try and get people to buy rides on both of them. These are the price points going forward. But to try and if people ask, say ride either boat. It's worth the trip. Odds and ends. We have a Coast Guard authorization to carry 25 passengers. There's one boat and swift boat in dry in the Washington Navy Yard in D.C. We used to have a second boat down in Virginia, Norfolk, running for Tidewater Community College. That one has since been done away with. And then we have PCF 104 up in the skids at the Vietnam Memorial across the bay. Tribute to the Coast Guard and Navy sailors who died in Vietnam. Our action plan, read the facts, develop your own 3 topics or however many you want, accompany the listening comment strategy, and then come ride with us. Dennis, Jim Davis from the museum has said, you're welcome to ride anytime you like. Just check in with the kiosk. to make sure that there's room on that against that 25, and then attend the boarding brief. That's where the briefs are given. And storytelling, Dennis is going to tell you more about storytelling next week. Dennis, by the way, is a corpsman. Let me tell you this, the great stories I get from corpsmen. This shot is not going to hurt. So that was not just about PCF 816, that was about anything you do at the museum. Any questions? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Does the 816 have any significance? 816
Yeah.
number have any significance?
No, I don't know where the hell they came with that. I think they built it in 1968, and I think that's where the 8 came from.
Thank you very much, Bob. So we're gonna have a walkabout on the split boat in, what, 8:10?
Yeah, 10 is fine.
Yeah, 12, 10 after?
Yeah.
Okay.
One last sea story, but I gotta get a here for that. Behind you. I'll catch you. I promise not to fall. Come over here where I am. One day I was, there you go. Da Nang. And I mentioned that the purpose of swift boats was to stop the flow of supplies coming in from North Vietnam to troops in South Vietnam. Well, nobody's going to run supplies into Da Nang. Every place was taken up by a military facility. So it was a very boring patrol. So I decided to go south to a Coastal Group 14, which is a South Vietnamese Navy junk base, the southern end of the patrol area, still Indian country, and go up the river and talk to those folks. Now, I had written orders not to go up rivers, but swift boat sailors did that anyway. Okay, so I went in and we talked to our counterparts. My gunners may talk to their gunners, because although it was South Vietnamese Navy facility, they had U.S. Navy advisors. The senior Navy advisor, who was a full lieutenant in 03, he said, "Come with me. I want to show you something with the refugee village outside our minefield." So he said, "Follow me." Well, that was maybe the only time that this 02 observed the orders of an 03 going through the minefield. Follow him. Exactly. Okay. His memory was good. When we got to the other side, we talked to some of the refugees. That was always heartbreaking. And then he took me out to the refugee village. There's a flagpole there. He said, "Look up the flagpole. There's a VC rally flag up there. It's yours if you want it." So I said to myself, two things. One was people who moonlight this VC rally flag raisers. Maybe had a day job as a sniper. And the other thing was, I was just beginning my boat sail in Vietnam, and in order to survive that, I had to be bulletproof. Several years later, back in the real world, shore duty, come home at night, driving the desk. How exciting. Here's my bride on her hands and knees, scrubbing the kitchen floor, what she calls rag. I got up in Vietnam jump. So you know where that's going, right? So, we had to talk about that, and I told her that, don't sweat it, because Bolger's flag book for battlefield combat flag etiquette, don't Google things. It's okay to wipe the floor and maybe parts of your anatomy, your enemy's battle. People who have fought under a battle flag are equivalently watch one too many non-rain movies. Will say things like, my colors don't run, my colors don't fade. Well, oh, wow. Put yourself on scrubbing borax in 50 years, the colors do fade.
Wow. Crazy. Wow.
Thanks a lot.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, thank you.